He was a Teamsters union official, and police suspected he knew a lot about the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Last night he was walking in Little Italy when two gunmen started shooting and left him dying. Gabe has more on that story.
The tenements are closely packed on Mulberry Street near Grand. There are many windows, but police found it difficult today to find many witnesses. Salvatore Briguglio was the business agent of Teamster Local 560, a union in which Anthony Tony Provenzano had a major role. Provenzano had been feuding with Hoffa before the Teamster leader disappeared. Briguglio was gunned down outside Benito's restaurant. It was shortly after 11 last night. The scene just 1 block north of Umberto's Clam House, where gangster Joseph Joey Gallo was assassinated just 6 years ago. Briguglio, police said, had not been inside Benito's. Exactly where he was coming from, not determined. Two men appeared. They started to argue with Briguglio, pushed him into the street, fired 5 shots into him, and fled, possibly on foot, although there was a report the men had taken off in a car on Grand Street. The head of Manhattan Homicide had no doubts about the nature of the crime.
Well, it looks to me as if it was a hit, just as we know, as a hit would get down.
And as far as the motivation is concerned, you have no idea now?
We don't have any idea. Our people are out right now speaking to the Federal Strike Force out in Newark and to the other people who possibly might have information on this gentleman.
Was Briguglio shot because he knew too much? Was he shot because he threatened to talk about what he knew? Many windows on Mulberry Street, few leads. Briguglio, his brother Gabriel, and a third man, Thomas Andretta, were questioned intensively by police in the investigation of the kidnapping and apparent murder of Hoffa. We approached some people on Mulberry Street. Did anyone see what happened? Did they see it from windows?
Not that I know of. No, the detectives investigated us already. They went over our buildings here.
Yeah.
They did investigate us.
And nobody saw anything, huh? Another gangland-style killing on the Lower East Side. The batting average for solution of such crimes is very poor, and privately, police are quite pessimistic that they'll be able to solve this murder or the related crime, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. This is Gabe Pressman, Channel 5 News on Mulberry Street.
The outcome in U.S. District Court today was not good for New Jersey Teamsters boss Tony Provenzano. A jury found him guilty of conspiring to get kickbacks on a $2.3 million loan from a union pension fund. Another Teamster official was gunned down last week. As John Miller tells us, it's just one in a series of gangland-style murders.
The body of Teamster official Salvatore Briguglio passed through the gates of George Washington Memorial Park in Paramus this morning. Federal officials were trying to sort out the facts surrounding half a dozen similar rub-outs. Leopold Landerhoff, described by police as a figure in the Genovese crime family, found in the trunk of his car at Kennedy Airport yesterday. Pasquale Marcioli, according to local authorities, an associate of Landerhoff's, was found in the trunk of another car on Thursday. Avenue U and East 4th Street, an expensive cigar in a pool of blood marked the spot where America's Scorsese died. Patrick Provenzano, shot 4 times, his throat cut. Provenzano was allegedly connected to reputed mob boss Carmine Galenti. And so it goes. The list of names grows longer, and according to the Intelligence Division of the New York City Police Department, many of those who make good by being bad are nowhere to be seen these days. And when they are, there's lots of company. Federal law enforcement sources say there's good reason for that. According to FBI sources, the power play for control of New York's 5 families has just begun. With the recent development that alleged boss of all bosses Carmine Galenti will be in jail for another 2 years, there has been much movement in gangland. When former boss Carlo Gambino died, Galenti was fast and furious in taking command. He won a brief but tough battle with Agnello Della Croce, who tried for the #1 spot himself. Now, intelligence sources say Della Croce is trying again to take over the 5 families from Galenti, thus breaking the peace made between those 2 men more than a year ago. It was shortly after 9 o'clock this morning in a secluded parking area off the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn. Police were called to the scene by a tow truck operator who found 2 bodies slumped in the back seat of a late model car. Police woke the 2 people. They had been sleeping after a long drive. One detective, as he left the scene this morning, said, "We've got good reason to be nervous these days." John Miller, Channel 5 News.
Good evening. December 11th may go down as the day of the biggest robbery in our country's history, and it happened right here in New York. Somewhere between $3 and $5 million in cash and valuables was taken from the Lufthansa cargo terminal out at Kennedy Airport. And the law enforcement officers say that it was carried off with such precision and such daring, you almost have to consider it an inside job. Here's Anthony Preisendorf.
The Red Baron was caught napping, and not by amateurs either. This band of robbers had everything down pat and made the entire caper from beginning to end go as smoothly as Swiss clockwork. Shortly before 4 this morning, while the moon was on the wane, a black Ford van slipped out of the shadows in the cargo area and stopped at a padlocked gate of the adjacent Argentine Airlines. One snip with heavy bolt cutters, and that security checkpoint might as well not have been there. The band of robbers, 6 and perhaps 7 men wearing ski masks, drove around to the loading dock. When they jumped one Lufthansa worker, his screams made a security guard inside open the door. That was the end of security. The gunmen rushed inside and knew exactly where to go. They forced the night supervisor to disconnect the silent police alarm and then take them to the high-value room on the first floor. The other 8 workers who were on duty at the time were herded into a third-floor cafeteria and handcuffed. One worker who resisted was pistol whipped. His scalp needed 5 stitches. After the supervisor had opened the safe for the thieves, the rest was duck soup. They took 30 shipments of gold, pearls, jewelry, and checks. They also knew just where to look for the $3 million in used money that had been flown in on Friday from Frankfurt, intended for delivery later in the day to the Chase Manhattan Bank. Used money, in bank parlance, is money that's already been in circulation, and more importantly, money for which no record of serial numbers exists. Needless to say, the Red Baron's face was a little redder than usual today, but officials pointed out he'll survive.
It'll have one impact, I'm sure, that we have to again reassess our security. But it is as good as it humanly can be done. So, you know, robberies are something that happens.
The big unanswered question at this stage of the investigation, and perhaps you could call it a $3 million unanswered question, is why all these valuables were allowed to remain here at the cargo terminal all weekend instead of being shipped off to the banks as they were supposed to be. At JFK, this is Anthony Preisendorf, Channel 5 News.
Frank Funzi Tieri died in New York 2 days ago. Officials say Tieri was the head of organized crime and that he led the Vito Genovese crime family, which has 600 members. Tieri was buried in Brooklyn today, and John Miller was there.
The passing of Frank Tieri struck a contrast to the life he had lived. His funeral was at a small church in Bensonhurst. It was a modest funeral for a man said to be a crime czar worth millions. It was a civilized way to go for a man whose name was so often connected with violence and bloodshed. It brought back memories to a reporter who has kept an eye on organized crime. One thought back to Brooklyn, 1979. Carmine Galenti, said to be the boss of all bosses, wiped out over lunch at an Italian restaurant's garden. The plot to kill Galenti had been mapped out by 2 crime bosses who, according to mob informants, had sought Tieri's advice. Tieri, they say, had some difficulty dealing with Galenti and gave the go-ahead for his murder. That would eventually lead to Tieri being seen as the new head of New York's 5 families. One also thought back to Philadelphia, March 1980. Then crime boss Angelo Bruno was blown away in a friend's car. Bruno had reportedly agreed with Tieri to split the action in Atlantic City. Bruno's partners in crime thought the deal was a little too generous to the New Yorkers, according to our sources, and so Bruno had to go. This man, known as Chicken Man Testa, took over. A year, almost to the day that these pictures were taken at Bruno's funeral, Testa was blown off his porch by a powerful bomb. And so Frank Tieri lived to see the end of the man who most believe cut him out of the action in Atlantic City. As one stood on 85th Street on this spring morning, watching people weep over the fragile 77-year-old man who died here, one could look at some of the faces who did show. There were relatives and friends, some undercover cops, a lawyer, and some soldiers from the Genovese family sprinkled in the crowd, but none of the big men in the Genovese family and none of the bosses of other families. Only flowers spoke for many who were not there. Perhaps they didn't come to avoid the cameras, or perhaps they were just too busy keeping crime organized In New York, John Miller, Channel 5 News.
He died on an empty stomach. And because it happened that way, the theory is the biggest mafia rub-out of the decade took place with considerable help from inside the dead mobster's family. 6 shell casings were on the pavement of East 46th Street, right next to the body of Paul Castellano Sr., the top mafiosi in the United States, the heir to the Gambino family, indeed the son-in-law of the late Carlo Gambino, on trial for conspiracy and racketeering in a case stemming from an alleged auto theft ring. 10 feet away, Castellano's driver and bodyguard, 45-year-old Thomas Bellotti, the keys to his late model limousine not far from his hand.
They were shot numerous times with automatic weapons. Questions?
Where were they hit?
They were hit in the head and in the body.
There were witnesses, but not many. They told police of an apparently well-trained and heavily armed hit squad.
The only thing we can ascertain at this time is that it was 3 males wearing trench coats who left towards 2nd Avenue, and another witness states that he saw them get into a dark car.
No comment. No comment. How about your lawyer?
It was last February that Big Paul Castellano refused to comment on his indictment on racketeering charges. Back then, he posted $2 million bail. Tonight, police would not say if Castellano was on his way to dinner at the restaurant outside which he was gunned down, though Castellano was known to visit many of the city's better eateries. More interesting to detectives is how the hit team knew to wait for Castellano near the corner of 46th and 3rd. They also want to know how a Patrolmen's Benevolent Association card got into the hands of the mobsters and into the window of the limousine at which the hit took place. Relatives of the slain mafiosi visited the scene tonight, positively identifying the bodies. They hid and refused to talk to reporters as they left.
I'm Dave Rowdy from Channel.
Just 2 weeks ago at his federal trial, a witness said of Castellano that the reputed mafia chief had objected to particularly brutal methods to be used in a mob-style hit. Now Castellano himself is the victim of such a hit. The question is whether his death will spark a new mafia war in New York or be the end of one. I'm Dave Rowdy, Channel 5.
Last Sunday, reputed mobster Frank DeCicco was blown up by a car bomb in front of a Brooklyn restaurant. Today, he was buried in an unconsecrated grave after the Catholic Church refused to give him a mass. As Frank Grimes reports, even his boss would not come out to pay his respects.
This morning, Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Friends and family of Frank DeCicco carry his body from the Carpacci Funeral Home. Sunday afternoon, also in Bensonhurst, a police officer had carried DeCicco's body from this car. DeCicco, second in command of the Gambino organized crime family, had opened the passenger door. A bomb under the front seat exploded, killing him. Why? The most popular law enforcement theory, revenge. DeCicco, once loyal to former Gambino crime boss Paul Castellano, was suspected of having helped plan his murder in Manhattan last December 16th. Also killed was Thomas Bellotti, the man who was next in line for Castellano's job. With Castellano and Bellotti out of the way, John Gotti, an alleged Gambino family member who had been at odds with Castellano, allegedly took over and appointed DeCicco as his underboss. Rival factions within the family resented this, so the hit. Today, the funeral without a Catholic Mass. Church officials said one could be held at a later date. The funeral without John Gotti. He was in Brooklyn federal court at his trial on racketeering charges. We kept our distance as we made a record of yet another mob funeral. But we weren't the only ones with cameras and pens. Peering through Rain Streak windows, FBI agents and city cops made their own record of the event. Video and still cameras whirred and clicked as mourners, some of whom hid their faces, left the funeral home. A visual attendance record. Who's there, who's not there, an indication to law enforcement who might replace DeCicco as underboss to Gotti, or who might be the principal in the next funeral. Frank Grimes, Channel 5 News.